An absolute stunner as five-star safety Blaine Bradford commits to Ohio State. We're reacting to it. Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We are free available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe as always. One of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. What a shocker. No other way to say it. Monday morning, Blaine Bradford, the five-star safety out of Catholic High in Baton Rouge, went public with his commitment to Ohio State. So we got a lot to talk about here. How did it happen? Can LSU flip him? What does it mean? All that stuff. We'll get to that here in this bonus episode of Locked on LSU. So let's just start from the beginning for those maybe who are unsure of who Blaine Bradford is. So Blaine Bradford is from Baton Rouge, went to St. Thomas More Elementary School, then went to Catholic High. It's the CSAL, the Catholic School Leagues in Baton Rouge, are a feeder for Catholic High. And the Bradford brothers, Jacob and Blaine, both went to St. Thomas More and then ended up at Catholic High. As a freshman, Blaine Bradford sort of burst onto the scene when you could see the potential. As a sophomore is when his recruitment really started to ramp up. However, he missed a bulk of his sophomore season with a knee injury. He did return for the state finals and then, of course, played this past year as a junior, had a fantastic season, and is now heading into his senior season. It is also anecdotal to note that Blaine's older brother, Jacob, just signed with LSU as a defensive back for the class of 2025. So Jacob Bradford will be an LSU Tiger starting in June. After he graduates from high school, he'll be a June enrollee and go through summer workouts with the team. So when you look at Blaine's bio, he is a guy that everybody in the country wants. And if you're LSU, he's the kind of guy you talk about keeping in the state. He is 6'1", 200 pounds. In the On3 composite, he's a 4-star, but the way On3 works is that you probably know by now because we've talked about it, especially if you're an everydayer, shout out. On3 awards just 32 5-stars that are representative of the 32 NFL teams, as if these would be 32 first-round picks, essentially. And so they continue to add 5-stars as you go further along into the recruitment process. So Bradford very likely is going to be a consensus 5-star before it's all done. The On3 composite has Bradford as the number 25 player in the country, the number 2 safety in the country, the number 2 player in Louisiana behind only Lamar Brown, the offensive lineman out of U High. Rivals has Bradford as a 5-star already, the number 1 safety, and the number 13 overall player at any position. The lowest Bradford is rated is by 24/7. They have him as the 7th best safety and the 57th best overall prospect. So even when you're talking about the bottom ranking, like the floor for him is the 7th best safety and the 57th best player in the country. And I always talk about, you hear me say this, the rankings, ratings are all one thing. Who offered you? Well, he's committed to Ohio State. He's offered by LSU, Texas, Alabama, Notre Dame, Oregon, Arkansas, USC, Texas A&M, Penn State, Tennessee, Florida State, Georgia, Oklahoma, Michigan, everybody. Like, he's got dozens of offers. Everyone has offered. Everyone would take him. He's the best safety in the country. He's a guy everybody wants. And this is particularly jarring for LSU because you're talking about a guy that if you go look at the On3 composite, right, and they look at the On3 composite prediction, 93.9% odds of landing at LSU. 93.9. Nobody else had more than 2%. Texas was next at 1.8%. Ohio State was at 1.6%. So, my goodness, it was thought to be a heavy favorite to land in Baton Rouge at LSU. And you may say, well, it's NIL. And there's probably a component of that. I think it's naive to assume anything other than NIL or rev share being a part of it. For what it's worth, Bradford gave an interview with a Rivals affiliate, with the On3 affiliate for Ohio State, and said, quote, "From the moment I stepped on campus, I knew Ohio State was different. The culture here has been built on toughness, discipline, standard of excellence that pushes players to be their absolute best. He also went on to say, Ohio State checks every box. I'm ready to be part of something special. He's talked about how his friends have been supportive of him all the way throughout the process. And he says, when you're surrounded by coaches who demand the best and teammates who hold each other accountable, greatness isn't just expected, it's the standard. So talked about the coaching staff playing a massive role in his decision, how they develop him as a person, not just as an athlete. A lot of the standard things you hear guys say, but the surprise here is the timing. The surprise is that here we sit in March and Bradford popped that commitment, because all along when Blaine Bradford had given interviews throughout his recruitment, and of course, young people want to change their mind, and that happens. But all throughout the process, Blaine Bradford had talked about committing during the summer, most likely in July, after his official visits and before his senior season of high school. That's what he had put out. I mean, that's from the horse's mouth, that he was going to take his official visits in June and then commit somewhere very likely in July before his senior season started. So for this to pop in March is very much a surprise, and why it threw a lot of people off. The other part of this that makes it a giant surprise is his brother. So I just mentioned Jacob Bradford, who's a year older than Blaine, signed with LSU for the class of 2025. So he just signed with LSU in December. And Jacob is he's officially signed as a corner, but he could play corner, he could play safety, he could play star. He's a more versatile back. Blaine is the higher ceiling prospect, to be certain. But Jacobs is a worthy LSU defensive back. It's not like he got the offer just because he's Blaine's brother, but that's also one of the things many assumed would be a big benefit for Blaine, was that his brother was on campus. We see that all the time. Look at the Weeks brothers. I mean, LSU recruited West Weeks out of the transfer portal, later added Whit Weeks, and now Zach Weeks is going to be an LSU Tiger as well. That's quite common, actually, when siblings end up playing together on a football team or in the same program. So it's natural to think that was going to be part of this. So now with Blaine Bradford committing to Ohio State, there's two things that really you got to consider now moving forward. Number one is, what does this mean for LSU safety room? And number two, can they flip him? So let's get into that as we continue here. Locked on LSU, your team every day. March Madness is here. FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. And with tournament action games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on, and the FanDuel app is simple to use. When you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. That's FanDuel.com. Okay, so let's look at the LSU safety room as it stands now and what they're looking at for 2026 and beyond now with Bradford committed to Ohio State. Again, they're not going to stop recruiting Blaine Bradford now because he's committed to Ohio State. But it is appropriate, I think, at this point that we have to look at the LSU safety room and what this means. So, of course, for 2025, remember, you saw Sage Ryan transfer to Ole Miss. Major Burns is out of eligibility. Okay. You have Jordan Gilbert returning, and this will be his final year of eligibility. Okay. And I know Gilbert last year was one of the lowest rated defensive players for LSU, but remember, he suffered the shoulder injury, played basically with one arm the entire season. He's not participating in spring because he had shoulder surgery, and he's back for his senior season. And with a healthy Jordan Gilbert, it's going to be interesting to see how he may do. You went and got Tamarcus Cooley out of the transfer portal. Cooley is a redshirt sophomore, so he's in his third year. So he is eligible to go to the draft after this season, but remains to be seen if he might return to LSU in 2026 for a fourth season, which would certainly be an option. He could play 3 more years at LSU should he choose to do that. Deshaun Spears, who's going into his sophomore year, will be back for 2026. Javen Toviano, who's playing safety as well, is going into his junior year, could also be back in 2026 for his senior season. Austin Osbury, a transfer from Auburn, is going into his redshirt junior season, so he could play a fifth year in Baton Rouge in 2026. And then there's Bradford, Jacob Bradford, CJ Jim Coyley, Jace Thomas, the safeties that you just signed in this most recent class, and also Joel Rogers, who's a redshirt freshman. All that to say, of all the names I just mentioned, Cooley, Gilbert, Spears, Rogers, Toviano, Osbury, Bradford, Jim Coyley, Thomas, the 9 safeties, the 9 scholarship safeties you have on the roster for 2025, only one of them is gone for sure in 2026, and that's Jordan Gilbert, because he'll be out of eligibility as a fifth-year senior. So you will have, in theory, 8 safeties returning for 2026. Now, that lessens the blow if Bradford does stick with his commitment and goes to Ohio State, because if you get 8 safeties returning for 2026, it's hard to, especially veteran guys, right? Cooley would be a fourth-year guy. Spears would be a third-year guy. Rogers would be a third-year guy. Toviano would be a fourth-year guy. Osbury would be a fifth-year guy. Like, all those guys are upperclassmen. So it would be hard to believe that Bradford would step on campus and be like a starter day one. You certainly could have an Eric Reed type situation where Reed stepped on campus, was a contributor. By the time he got to November, he had just overtaken everybody and was ready to be the guy. So that could happen for a guy like Blaine Bradford at LSU year one if LSU was able to get the flip. But what this does in effect is because you have so much depth at the position, in theory, for 2026, and again, guys could transfer, other guys could leave early. We all know that could happen. But when you think about the depth in 2026, it lessens the blow and allows you the opportunity to build up this recruiting class at safety for 2026, and then also go into the portal if you need to. I will remind you that LSU has a safety from Louisiana already committed for 2026 in Aiden Hall. Aiden Hall is the number 55 overall prospect in the country in the on-3 composite. He's the number 5 safety in the country out of Edna Carr. So you're still talking, by the way, Rivals rates him as the number 33 overall prospect, the number 3 safety, 6 foot 175. So that is a high level player there at safety that you've got committed in Aiden Hall. And then remember, you also have Dylan Purter, who's listed as a cornerback but projects as a safety at LSU, 6'1", 172. They got him out of Tuskegee, Alabama. So you've got 2 safeties committed, including Aiden Hall, who is a high-level safety. And you've got 8 guys, potentially 8 guys returning for 2026. So the point being, all that to say, the short term, right, the immediate short term of 2026, you're probably good if Bradford sticks with his Ohio State commitment. Would you love to have him? Absolutely. And you keep recruiting him because you want to have him. Now, can they flip him? The answer obviously is yes. And as of now, Bradford still has his official visits locked in, and he's got 3 of them. He's going to Texas June 6th through 8th. He'll be back at Ohio State June 13th through 15th. And then LSU gets the final official visit June 20th through 22nd. So he'll get LSU will get the final swing, right? The final bite at the apple, so to speak, the final pitch for Blaine Bradford when he's going through his officials. So that's a good thing. And the fact that you have time is also a good thing. Like if this were like the Bryce Underwood situation when he flipped in at the end of November, a week and a half before signing day, that was devastating because not only did you lose Underwood, but you weren't in on any other quarterbacks because you were so pot committed to that guy. Because it's March and the signing date isn't until December, you have time to go get in on other top tier safeties if you feel like that's a necessity in this class. Now, I'm not going to undersell this. There's a couple other points, and maybe I should have led with this, but I'm not going to undersell and understate the importance of this. We have talked for months, probably as much as a year now, about this 2026 class and how it's a bumper crop in Louisiana. And when you look at the championship team, if you're an everydayer, you've heard me say this too many times. You can finish the sentence for me. How all of the LSU championship teams were built on these bumper crops in Louisiana and keeping them in state, going back to the 2001 class with Michael Clayton and Marquise Hill and Marcus Spears and Andrew Whitworth and all those guys, all the way up through, you look at the 2019 championship and all the guys from Louisiana and even Greater Baton Rouge area on that team, from Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Patrick Queen. I mean, you had dudes, Derek Stingley, You had dudes loaded all over that roster. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Louisiana guys who were the stars of that team. And so when you have a year like this in Louisiana, you got to keep the best players there. Remember, 26 was supposed to include Jakeem Stewart. He reclassified. He's at SC. So right now, of the 3 players that were supposed to be at the top of 26, Jakeem Stewart's at USC. Blaine Bradford is committed to Ohio State. Lamar Brown was just at Miami this past weekend and said he had a great visit. But he, by his own admission, has said LSU, Lamar Brown, has said LSU still very much in the lead. But a couple of things. Number one, you still have the official visit, and that's a great thing. The other part of this, though, is we learned the lesson with Underwood and Jakeem Stewart and Cade Phillips at the end of last year's signing day, which is it's never done. No matter how much it seems done, it's never done until it is. Flip this on its head. A couple of weeks ago, LSU landed a commitment from a 5-star number 1 wide receiver in the country in Tristan Keys. And so many of your reactions, I read your comments, so many of your reaction was, what does a commitment mean? Doesn't matter anymore. These guys, NIL, I'll believe it when the ink dries. It's a very cynical point of view. And I'm not saying you're wrong to have that cynical point of view because you were bit by it. But the flip side of it is you also landed a 5-star interior offensive lineman on signing day last year in Solomon Thomas when you got him to flip from Florida State at the end of the process. So just like NIL or revenue share can work against you, it can also work for you when positioned appropriately. So that really is going to be the onus on LSU now. Jake Olson is the primary recruiter. Corey Raymond is the secondary recruiter to make sure that everybody's pulling in the same direction and you find a way to convince Blaine Bradford before December to be part of this class because you desperately want him to be a part of this class. It would be hypocritical of me to sit here and tell you all throughout this process how important the 2026 class is and keeping these guys in the state. And then one of the top 2 players and the number 1 player in the country at his position goes to Ohio State and I try to downplay it. I'm not going to be hypocritical. It's a big deal. And you want Blaine Bradford. But I will say this, and this isn't just about Blaine Bradford. I say this about the first time I remember really going hard with this point of view was when Dylan Moses flipped from LSU to Alabama. And a lot of LSU fans gave that young guy a lot of grief. And the point I made then is the same point I'm going to make now. Who are we or anybody to tell a 17, 18-year-old what they should do? All you can do as a coach, as a recruiting staff, is put your best foot forward, like LSU did with Bryce Underwood. They recruited him for 3 years. Joe Sloan practically took up residency in the state of Michigan. He loved LSU. He loved Joe Sloan. He was in Baton Rouge for the Alabama game. He's talking about being part of the culture. He brought his whole family down here. Like, he was in until he got a $12 million offer, and he took it because that was best for him and his family, and I don't blame him one iota. And who knows what any criteria someone's considering. I've told you this before. I wasn't an athlete, but I left LSU. I left Louisiana. I went away to school for a year. Thought I wanted to leave. Now, ultimately, I ventured back and transferred to LSU. It was the best decision I ever made. I loved it at LSU, being a student at LSU. My brother went to the University of Notre Dame. Like, if we have a brilliant kid at Catholic High whose name is Blaine Smith instead of Blaine Bradford, who's a brainiac instead of being a safety, and he decides to go to Harvard, do we criticize that kid for leaving for academic reasons? No. So we have to be sensible about this as adults. Like, let a 17, 18-year-old young person make a decision that they feel is best for them in their life. We don't have to like it. We don't have to be pumped about it. But the bottom line is, I've seen too much adult comments going, shame on you, Blaine, loyalty, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's a two-way street. And if you're an adult and you're criticizing a child, a young person, for where they're choosing to go to college, then shame on you. You're the one who needs a reality check in life. Look, LSU is going to be fine in football, whether they get Blaine Bradford or not. Do you want him? Desperately, you do. But I'll tell you this much as well, and this is the other big part of this. I've given this example since the Joe McKnight situation, the late Joe McKnight. It sucks when there's a guy from Louisiana who you desperately want and you don't get him. It's a miserable feeling because you almost count on those like as salary. It's like, you're getting those kids from Louisiana. And when you don't get an elite one that you want, it stinks. But Joe McKnight went to Southern Cal and you never had to see him. What really, really stinks is when Landon Collins goes to Alabama, when Dylan Moses goes to Alabama, when Devontae Smith goes to Alabama. That's what stinks. If Blaine Bradford is not going to go to LSU, I'd rather see him in Columbus, Ohio, than in Austin, Texas. Tigers and the staff, they have work to do to get him to flip, and they'll have an official visit in June. Here's hoping before December, they can put enough of a good foot forward to flip that commitment and get Blaine Bradford to be a part of this class. But a March commitment by Bradford was certainly a surprise. You know what? If you want a little hopium, last year, when the number one wide receiver in the country, DeCorian Moore, committed to LSU, it was a stunner. Everybody thought he was going to end up at Texas. He ended up signing with Oregon. So when he's from Texas and he committed to LSU and everybody thought it would be Texas, that was a shocker to a lot of people. And ultimately, LSU didn't hold the commit. He ended up going to Oregon. But the point is, you go through these processes and a lot can still happen. So a lot will still happen in Blaine Bradford's recruitment. LSU is going to stay on him. We'll see if ultimately they can get him to flip before December. But a big shock and one that you should not feel great about on this day. But if you go 10,000-foot view at the LSU safety position, the good news is you brought in Marcus Cooley. You've got depth and talent for 2025. You'll have 8 of your 9 safeties eligible to come back in 2026, and you've already got one of the elite safeties in the country committed for 2026. Not getting Blaine Bradford stinks. You'll have to fill that void another way, but it's not too late to get him. But 10,000-foot view, you're still okay at safety, boy, even though you'd love to have Blaine Bradford. So work to do for the LSU staff between now and that December signing day. Of course, we'll have all the conversation for you right here on Locked On LSU. Hey, thanks for making us your first listen. Again, if you're on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.